Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all viewers, listeners to today's online e-lecture. Today's online e-lecture's topic is communication skills. Communication skills is a set of soft skills being mostly used by us humans when interacting with one another. Before I move on, let me have a short introduction of myself, the presenter for today's online e-lecture. My name is Rafiq Ali. I'm a student from Temasek Polytechnic, and the subject that I'm enrolling in or I'm taking is actually the Global Citizenship and Community Development subject from Temasek Poly. For today's outline, we have four main subjects that we'll be covering, and that includes the definition of communication skills, the importance of having great communication skills, the commonly used types of communication skills, as well as lastly the ways on how you can improve your communication skills. So, what is communication skills? As previously mentioned, it is a set of soft skills used by us humans in conveying messages, exchanging informations, ideas, feelings between one entity to another. It is essential within the business, working, as well as public life as an individual, as you often do communicate with others within your surrounding, be it when you're at work, be it when you're at home, be it when you're in the public. Communication skills helps humans, us, to achieve understanding or to be understood by another person or group. Moving on, the importance on having great communication skills. Why is it so important to have a great communication skills? Firstly, it helps to deepen relations between both in professional as well as in personal lives, as often relationships are being progressed when you communicate more, meaning to say you need to communicate more to actually develop a better relationship with another person. It helps to understand people better as well as helps others to understand us better. Having great communication skills means that your messages are being conveyed perfectly, such that your listeners or the other party is able to understand you better. It helps to avoid unnecessary conflicts and helps better decision making processes. Why would I say it? Is because that often conflicts arise due to a certain message not being addressed to the listener appropriately, and therefore it could actually lead to an unnecessary conflict, as the other party may not fully understand the appropriate message that you're trying to convey to them. It also improves cohesiveness within a group setting or in teamwork, meaning to say it improves your teamwork with others, as people get to know you better through your communication. Therefore, it makes the group setting more cohesive or efficient, I should say. Also, do note that communication skills is the most sought after soft skills in the workforce currently. As you can see on the right hand side of the slide, there's a data being showed, and the data actually puts up the top 10 most in-demand soft skills in the workforce. And as you can see, the top number one is actually communication, which is at 57.9%. And this shows how important it is to have actually a great communication skills. Moving on, the commonly used types of communication skills includes 4 types. What are they? They are verbal, non-verbal, written, as well as visual. Verbal communication. Verbal communication is a type of communication that requires a person to speak or to use his vocal. It can be both virtually as well as physically, as long as a vocal or a sound is being used as the means of communication. It will be considered as a verbal communication. Some of the examples of verbal communication includes face-to-face conversation, Skype calls, as well as meetings. Verbal communications has both formal as well as non-formal type. So we often do use formal type in professional lives or working settings. You do normally use formal communication when you're talking to your bosses or when you're talking to your colleagues, whereas informal type of communication is often used when you're at home, in your personal life, when you are interacting with your mom, your dad, or even your siblings. Moving on, non-verbal communication. Non-verbal communication, as you can see or you can tell, is actually the direct opposite of verbal communication, which is earlier said. It is a type of communication that does not require any sound or any vocal to be used as a means of communication. Similarly to verbal communication, non-verbal can also be virtually as well as physically. Some of the examples of non-verbal communication includes facial expressions, gestures, like what is being put up as a picture, a hand sign, eye contacts, and also touches. Moving on, written communication. It is a type of communication that can be categorized under the non-formal communication, which is earlier said, includes messages that are usually being typed out or written out. Ability to have a great written communication is important, as it ensures others or even yourself that the message being put up across is actually being understood perfectly. Some of the elements, the important elements of great written communication skills includes clarity, conciseness, tone, active tone, grammar, as well as punctuations. So when we're talking about clarity, it helps your readers to understand what you're saying, or at least understand enough to know what questions that they need to ask for further clarifications. When it comes to conciseness, it is important to get your point quickly as well as efficiently. Include only the details that are necessary to communicate your point. Tone refers to the voice of your writing. One example would be in business writing. Your tone would often enough be a professional tone, blended with a degree of formality as well as friendliness. Active tone is typically more accessible, easier to follow for readers than if you're using a passive tone. Active tone would help the sentence to flow better, allows your readers to move through your writing at a quicker pace. Grammars and punctuations is often being used or is used more proficiently in a formal writing setting, as it would give your reader a better understanding of what you're trying to say in your script, be it in written out or in typed out. Next, visual communication. Visual communication is the ability to communicate using signals received from the eyes. It requires the use of visual aid, read or view of ideas and informations to be communicated. Meaning to say, it requires a visual aid to actually get the ideas or information across to be communicated. A clear message being sent using the work of art, video, images to people can be also considered as a visual communication. Why is it important to have great visual communication? It helps to complement verbal communications, maintain interest as well as informations. Some of the examples include Instagram photos, TikTok videos, graphs, charts, as well as maps. And also not forgetting emojis. As you can see on the right hand side of the slide, it shows a set of emojis Emojis can also be considered as a visual communication. Moving on, ways to improve verbal communication skills. Number 1, simplify. Stay on message. Use simplified or straightforward languages to actually get across with your communication. Be engaging when communicating. Draw your listeners into the conversation, ask questions, and invite for opinions. Give yourself ample time to respond to a question. Make sure messages was delivered and understood, meaning to say, make sure that your message of your communication was delivered perfectly, such that the listeners actually do understand what was the message. And number 5, develop proper listening skills. Proper listening skills is actually very important, especially in the verbal communication setup. The best communicators are almost always the best listeners. Listen without judgment and don't be distracted by thinking about what you want to say next. Respond and not react. Number 6, pay close attention to body languages. Body languages is important for great communicators. Study shows that 65% of all communication is actually non-verbal communication. Therefore, body languages can actually do help verbal communicator to actually spot or read what that the listeners are actually reacting or having in mind. Number 7, maintain proper eye contact. Whether speaking to a crowd or one-to-one, maintaining eye contact builds credibility and demonstrates about your care to your listeners. You do not want to be looking in the eyes of your listeners directly, nor do you want to not even look at the eyes of the listeners for even a second. It should be somewhere in the middle. It should be a subtle amount of time to maintain eye contact when conversing with others. Number 8, and lastly, do seek advisors by your listeners on your communication skills. Get a constructive opinion from them on your communication, on your verbal communication. Through that, you can actually improve your verbal communication. So that is the 8 ways to improve on verbal communication skills. Moving on, ways to improve on non-verbal communication. Bear in mind that written as well as visual communication, as earlier said or earlier mentioned, it is actually part of non-verbal communication. So here are the ways to improve on your written communication skills. Number 1, know the message before even beginning to write your script or your messages. Number 2, be specific, stay on the message. Number 3, use outlines. Number 4, keep it short and sweet. And number 5, lastly, do remember to edit thoroughly after finishing writing. Have it edited or have it read through or proofread for at least 2 or 3 times. Most of us often do have basic grammar, spelling errors on our written out messages or typed out messages or scripts. Moving on to visual. Ways to improve on your visual communication. Number 1, brainstorm on how messages are to be conveyed in visual. Number 2, seek inspirations on getting messages across. Number 3, make it succinct. Number 4, make it appealing to the eyes. And lastly, of course, similarly to written, edit thoroughly after finishing. And that is the end for today's online e-lecture. Thank you for listening.